Okay, thanks for joining everyone and welcome to the day 7 of the Data Cloud Bootcamp. Matt is going to discuss about the identity resolution, and I especially want to give a special shout out to Matt. He has been a critical role in planning for this bootcamp, and he helped a lot for framing this bootcamp. And I wanted to take this opportunity and thank Matt for all his help and being so flexible in being available and uh, providing his suggestions and then adjusting his schedule to make it work. Thank you very much, Matt.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, JB. It's great to get a chance to meet some new faces as well as see some old friends. And I'm super excited to kind of talk to you today about Data Cloud. It's this single thing that I do. It's what I do all day, every day. Today, we're going to cover something called identity resolution, which if you've been following this series so far, this should all be pieces all should be falling into place. Identity resolution is absolutely the next best thing to be talking about as far as this bootcamp is concerned. But before we do that, got a couple things. There's a forward-looking statement. I throw it in there because I work for Salesforce, and I may sometimes, occasionally, probably not today, talk about things that are on the roadmap. There's certainly a lot of things that are on the Data Cloud roadmap, but whenever you're hearing those things that might be in pilot, things that are on the roadmap, things that are not yet GA, when you're thinking about making a purchase, make sure that those purchases are based on things and features, capabilities that are available at present, and not things that are yet to be. That's that. And I want to say thanks. Thanks to you, JB. Thanks for giving me and other folks the opportunity to kind of get together and talk about Data Cloud. Like I said, I'm super excited about it. It's the thing that I get to do all day. It's our fastest growing product ever, which is also super exciting. And the reason that it's growing is because of not just like the capabilities that it has, but because of people like you, that are there to kind of help share that story, to help understand kind of the value that it's generating. And so putting your time and energy in this is absolutely appreciated, because we think it's a pretty special product, and we hope that you do too. It's absolutely more than special. I would say it's the foundation of kind of what's coming next in terms of CRM and capabilities beyond that. Especially when we talk about AI. We're not going to get into AI today, but it's there, and it needs good data. So let's talk about the plan for today. Let's go through our basic agenda. We're going to first kind of do a bit of a recap. We're going to talk a little bit about where we're at so far in this lifecycle journey of data and its flow through Data Cloud. We'll talk a little bit about some basic capabilities of Data Cloud, but really kind of centering in mostly on what identity resolution is, why we want it, and then we'll start to break it down into some of its component parts. We'll talk about matching, we'll talk about reconciliation, we'll do some extra considerations, and then we'll kind of wrap up with your questions. So before I dig into all that stuff, I've done a little bit of introduction to myself, but some of you know me, some of you don't. I'll just take not too much of your time to kind of explain that. My name is Matt Wash. I work for Salesforce. I'm a new employee of Salesforce. I was in the partner space before, and now I've spent a year and some change with Salesforce. I work in an area called partner product success, and that's kind of a specific region within Salesforce, and we have a very specific charter. And what that means is our purpose and goal in life is to kind of be a connection point between the people that are developing the product at Salesforce and our partners, consulting partners. So like my role is really to kind of understand Data Cloud, get really good at it, and then kind of teach, the best and brightest consulting partners the same so that they can go on and teach their people. So that's kind of what our purpose is. And so I get to do that with other folks you've probably met, Vlad Silik as well, Arvind Raman. We're all on the same team, and our purpose is to kind of tell the story and help people understand from a kind of an advanced implementation considerations perspective what Data Cloud can do, and sometimes what it can't do and what it shouldn't do. So that's kind of enough about me. All right, and I have one announcement to make. This is awesome stuff. I don't know if you saw this, but if you didn't, Data Cloud's been on Trailhead for a while, but this is news. You can now get a hands-on development org by requesting one through Trailhead. And we have our very first trail that's on Trailhead now that allows you to kind of get your own development org. It's very short-lived org. It's a 5-day org. And then a Trailhead module that allows you to kind of step through some of the basic steps. This is big because this was only something that was available to consulting partners only before. And now it's available to everybody, which I'm really excited about. So if you want to head there, don't head there now, head there later. Grab that link, either the one that I've typed out there. You can get a quick picture on your phone to get to that trail, and it kind of walks you through the process of being able to request a 5-day trial org. So super excited about that. All right, let us talk a little bit about kind of data cloud in general, and kind of talk about the flow that data has been taking through data cloud. And what have we talked about so far in this series? We've had Elliot Harper in, and he's kind of talked about the various ways that sources can connect to data cloud. We kind of learned about what sources we can connect, how often that data can kind of be ingested into data cloud, what we can do with that data, and then what happens when it moves from like a DSO or a data source object to a DLO or a data lake object. We also kind of learned about the various categories of data and why categorizing data is, when you're ingesting it, it's really important. We may have even briefly touched on the various ways to kind of transform our data, so allow it to kind of take shape in different ways at this stage by using things like formulas and batch transformation. Then last week, Vlad Silek, who's on my team, he helped everybody understand the intricacies of harmonization. Harmonization, that's the process of being able to take the data that we've ingested, and then we connect it to a unified data model so that we can understand our data in a very consistent way. So kind of harmonizing data takes it out of its isolated data lake, and it connects it to other data from other various sources, now turning it into a data model object and making it more usable by the platform. So as we go about that process, Vlad also kind of taught the importance of primary keys, and how you need to have a primary key plan in place for your different DMOs and DLOs, and the purpose that those have in the modeling process. So now our data's been ingested, maybe it's been transformed a little bit, we've got it harmonized into a singular data model, and now we can start to examine individuals and accounts across all of it, and find a unified profile or an account through the process of identity resolution. You'll hear a lot in terms of marketing about a single source of truth when we talk about data cloud, or a single view of the customer. And today we'll kind of get into the process of how that gets created. The process is, I say it's fairly straightforward, but there's some intricacies there, some key terminology to understand. I think the biggest challenges that people have with this section are kind of conceptual, and how data cloud's unified profile compares to like a golden record that was kind of created, like something like it you might find in something like an MDM or a master data management system. We might have some time to do that. I might talk a little bit about that. I hope we get there, but I just want to make sure some of the basics are covered, because that's kind of what this is all about. It's about getting people understanding the very basics of data cloud. Then after we're kind of all aligned generally on the concept of identity resolution, we'll talk through some other ways to make use of it through, like in the next parts of this boot camp, where we start to talk about insights, actions, segmentation, activation, predictions, all the fun stuff. So before we get into too specific stuff, and we talk about functionality and matching rules and all those cool things, let's start with telling a little bit about the challenges that organizations face, kind of why we're trying to solve those challenges with a system like data cloud. As some of the previous presenters probably have talked about, and you might be sick of hearing it by now, you've got lots of little bits and pieces about your data, about customer data, I should say, that's kind of stored in all sorts of places within an organization. A customer is sharing different information with companies, and that's in different contexts and sometimes in different places. We're trying to make sense of all of that. So what identity resolution does is that it allows us to use all of those different identifiers for an individual and then group them together using logic that we define. And that can be really useful in complex scenarios where information is really scattered, right? So let's take a look at a use case. This is a common one. How do we build a segment for a population? Let's read it all together. So we're looking for what? We're looking for individuals. They're over 40 years old. They've opened emails for high efficiency washer dryers in the last 90 days. They don't have any open support cases. They've maybe purchased an appliance in the last 5 years. They might have a mobile phone number associated with their profile. So generally speaking, what is this? This is a segment, might be the start of a cross-sell campaign, maybe to loyal customers in their target demographic. We can already tell when we look at this type of request, it's going to be hard to be able to find all of that data in a single platform. We're looking for demographic information. We're looking for marketing, engagement, like service history, commerce activity, and specific contact information. And depending on where we might look, we might get too much information where we have conflicts. Maybe we have duplicate records or incomplete information where we don't have enough within a single system to be able to build our segment. So we need to unify our data to kind of give us a single view of that customer across all of those different sources so that we can make the right decisions with all the right information in one place. So let's look at how Data Cloud's identity resolution process can help here. So this is the basic process of identity resolution within Data Cloud. Identity resolution, it gathers together all the various sources of profile data that you might have. This could be individuals as well as accounts. Then it runs a two-part process on the gathered information. The first step is to run matching rules, which look across the various different attributes and contact points and identifiers for individuals or accounts and group them all together. That's going to create a unified profile. From there, we're going to describe that information that's been unified through the process of reconciliation, where we pick attributes that are from the contributing systems to represent our unified individual. This is a process that you can configure within Data Cloud. And it's not out of none of these things work precisely out of the box. It takes a lot of configuration, a lot of consulting, and there's a lot of components that make it up. So let's look at those next. Here's a quick visual representation of identity resolution's key components and terms. Like I'd mentioned before, identity resolution, it's essentially a two-part process. That process is going to produce two new records. It's going to produce a unified profile and a unified link. Unified profile, that's what we might call that single view of the customer. It's that record that links all of the connected profiles together. The unified link is essentially a junction between the unified profile and connected profiles. And again, this can be for either accounts or individuals. I do tend to repeat things sometimes. That's not by accident. The reason I might repeat some of these sometimes is because, well, we test on it. We have an exam on it. And, I'm sure that you might be able to need to differentiate between matching and reconciliation and some of these things as I start to repeat them. So that might be why I'm doing some of those things. Anyway, now that you're all listening, let's talk about matching again. It's the part of the process that looks through all of the different profiles that have been adjusted and then kind of determines which ones should be grouped together. And that's based off criteria that you define. I'll talk about criteria and rules in a second here. Then again, we've got that reconciliation. And its job, again, is to summarize that unified profile by using rules that you get to define. So my name's Matthew, but most people call me Matt. Reconciliation's process is to look at different representations of my key attributes. I might be Matt in this system. I might be Matthew in that system. And figures out, well, how do I want to represent this person? I have to pick one. Do I pick Matt or do I pick Matthew? You get to define the rules to be able to dictate that. Generally, so through that, as you're starting to plan this process, if you're going to be implementing Data Cloud for the very first time and you're thinking about identity resolution, as far as a process for getting your pieces together, you want to kind of follow this general process. So first of all, you cannot get started with identity resolution if you don't understand your data. this is really critical. You've got to know what information each source system is going to be bringing into Data Cloud and the attributes they're going to be bringing along with them that are going to allow you to kind of identify profiles across all of these different systems. So you need to do an audit of your data. Okay, so you need to know what are the identifiers that people have, what are the attributes that we could use to identify, and then you'll be setting up matching rules to kind of group those profiles together. They're kind of based on the supporting data that you've got. And you'll configure reconciliation rules to kind of summarize those unified profiles. And you give it a run. You'll see if it worked out perfectly the first time. If you did, you get a gold star from me. I don't know if that's ever happened before. Or if you've made a mess, you'll get to see what type of messes you've made. I say that somewhat kiddingly, just because it's rare that people absolutely love their results the first time they run identity resolution. They need to take a look at what's been combined. They need to take a look at the profiles that have been unified, make sure that we've made good matches, and kind of tweak that recipe to really get it right. Let's talk a little bit about the data that we'll need to kind of support this process next. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of data, especially if we're planning on connecting many sources, which is a thing that Data Cloud's exceedingly good at. And so as we start to pull those sources in, we're going to need to group those profiles together using rules that look at the various attributes and the identifiers that are kind of spread around an organization. It's pretty rare that an organization has kind of found a way to use a single identifier to identify every single individual in every system across an organization. And in those cases, well done, gold star. I'm not sure if Data Cloud is something you would need at this point, but I don't know. It's far more likely, though, that you're in that other scenario, right, where you have different attributes, different identifiers, for customers across all of your different systems. Essentially every little bit of information that a customer shares with us within a specific context or the specific system, it gives us a little piece of a bigger puzzle. And we got to be able to stitch all that together, and every organization is slightly different. So you might need a slightly different mix of matching criteria than somebody else. One puzzle piece we might get could come from their contract record in CRM. And with it might come their first name, their last name, mailing address, business phone number, record ID. Marketing Cloud's going to give us other puzzle pieces. It's going to provide their email address. It's going to give us their phone number. It's going to give us their subscriber key. Others coming from commerce, maybe they're sharing their personal address there, maybe their email, their phone number. We're getting a customer ID or a profile ID there. And then beyond what a customer has provided and shared, you've got your own identifiers. I've talked about a few of them, talked about contact ID, subscriber ID, profile ID. Lots of different ways to be able to identify a person across your systems. And these are just defaults that are coming from your systems, let alone ones that you're kind of creating through other processes. Maybe you have some type of MDM-like system out there. Maybe you're creating something like a golden record. That's not to say that it wouldn't work with Data Cloud. It absolutely does. So, I would say there are so many ways to kind of create identities for people in systems. That by itself can kind of cause issues. Most often we get duplicates, right? Because customers are using different identifiers at different times. Sometimes we are. Like, for example, in Marketing Cloud. How many people have a Marketing Cloud account that has a subscriber key that's an email address and a CRM ID, and maybe you've created some other one like a GUID, and maybe there's lots and lots of permutations out there. So, it sometimes isn't always like customer generated problems. We can create our own. So we have a hard enough time even with that to kind of understand who our customers really are. So how do we look at all those puzzle pieces and that are being shared with us and kind of put together a unified profile of all those different customers? Let's take a quick look at an example here with a person that might live in one of our systems and do just that. We're going to talk about Katrine Schmidt. We'll probably talk about her a lot today. So get used to her, seeing a lot of her. She's a normal retail customer. It's like most people, she's shared a fair amount of data, and it's already in lots of different places throughout our organization. And like most organizations, the data that we have in each one of those is probably far from perfect. She's got maybe old account data that's kind of resulting in duplicates. Maybe she's got a customer profile for the e-commerce platform, but instead of using her profile and logging in like a good person, maybe she just checks out as a guest from time to time. That happens. This is far from um, edge case scenarios here. This is all totally normal. And the result is she's got lots of little puzzle pieces of data again, and not all of those little puzzle pieces fit together. Let's take a look at this real quick. How many source systems can we spot here? And how many records within each of those sources? How many contact points within each record? Those data points can add up really, really quickly. From a source systems perspective, for Katrine's example, we're looking at 4, probably. We've got service, we've got marketing cloud, we've got commerce cloud, we've got loyalty. And from a records perspective, there's at least 6, probably more, depending on how many different combinations and names Katrine's been using for her guest checkouts in commerce, right? So let's start by looking at the places where each of those profiles overlap and where each of our puzzle pieces can start to fit together. In commerce, her customer profile and the guest checkout, they share the same customer name and phone number. Phone numbers might look slightly different since one includes a country code, but once we kind of normalize those and format them in a standardized way, they're going to look fairly identical. Between her guest checkout and loyalty profiles, she shares the same email address, and we can make a fuzzy or probabilistic match on her first name, Catherine and Katrine, so we can link those 2 puzzle pieces together too. Between loyalty and service, we can match on her name and her social media handle, the Katrine. We can also link another one of her service profiles with her commerce customer profile, since they share a same mailing address. And again, we've got a probabilistic fuzzy match on her first name. Lastly, we can link her marketing and cloud account with her name and email address with her loyalty account. So if we were trying to use one set of matching criteria for all of these different data points, let's say by matching on email address or mailing address or phone number, we wouldn't be able to do it. We couldn't stitch this entire profile together as nearly as completely as we need it to be. So in order for all of these profiles to come together, we're going to need to build a matching rule set that contains lots of different matching criteria. So when it comes to that process, kind of thinking, how do we go about our process? The best thing to do for starters, when we're looking at data like this, when we're trying to analyze, how do we put those puzzle pieces together? We just start by writing it down in very simple terms. What are the basic conditions that we're going to need to look to match on? Doesn't have to be perfect, just a basic inventory of all the attributes that are going to matter for that matching process. Based on that scenario that we just looked at for Katrine, I think we'll need to match on a few attributes here. We'll probably need to do a fuzzy match or probabilistic match on the first name, an exact match on the last name, mailing address, email, phone, and probably the social handle. So from here, we can start to think about how to group these different criteria together. When we're matching on personally identifiable information, PII, like we are in most of these examples, a simple match on one of these fields alone is not enough. For example, there might be a lot of John Smiths in the world, or Muhammad Ahmeds, or Katrines out there. And so, we wouldn't want to create matching criteria that were just too loose. We could make mistakes there in groupings. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in depth later. We also don't want to run the risk of making our rules too strict, so there's no consolidation of profiles, because that would kind of render our unification process a little worthless. So to help get all of our Katrines together, we're going to need to create more than one rule. A grouping of rules is called a rule set. So this is kind of an example of how identity resolution rules work. A rule is made up of different match criteria. Match criteria might be something like 2 profiles that share a fuzzy first name, an exact last name. match criteria then grouped together within a rule using and logic, exclusive. So it's time for a quiz. Here's my question. Let's say I want to add more criteria to a rule. If I add more criteria to a rule, and answer in the chat, and I'm not sure if I can see my chat. Let's see here. All right, I got it now.
So, yeah, but there's a question, Matt. Can we
Yeah.
provide a percentage of matching criteria out of the box?
Yeah, will adding more criteria to your match rule, is that going to increase or decrease the likelihood of matching profiles? What do we think? There's no wrong answer yet. Most people are saying decrease. I get a bell curve. That's a good one. Decrease. Another second here. Okay. Fewer results. Yes. You're all right. Gold stars are all around. It's going to decrease the overall match rate. When we add more criteria to a rule set, or a rule, I should say, we haven't gotten into rule sets, it does make it more difficult to match on profiles. Let me walk through a visual example. For example, if I need to match profiles on first name, last name, and phone number, I can immediately eliminate any profile that doesn't have a first name and a last name and a phone number. So my population of possible matches decreases. Take a look at this example. Individual number 2 out there, he doesn't have a phone number. So it's not going to get considered for the match rule. So just from a statistical population standpoint, as soon as we start adding more criteria, there's fewer people that even have that criteria to match on. So that population goes down. So when I add another match criteria, say my email address, I'm further reducing the population of people that could even potentially match on this rule. Because now any potential match has to have a first name, a last name, a phone number, and an email address. Remember, these are inclusive statements. Exclusive. I can't remember. Every criteria has got to basically be met in order for a rule to determine a match. But sometimes you want a little bit more flexibility in this. It looks like we can see that the more and more criteria we add to a rule, the less and less likely we're going to be able to match profiles. We want some flexibility, right? Maybe in some scenarios, we want to be able to match on a name and an email address, and in others, we want to be able to match on a name and a date of birth. Or in other cases, maybe we want to be able to match on a name and a phone number. So how do we account for that? Well, you can create more than one set of rules to match on. So let's do a quick recap of what we've learned. Let's talk a little bit about some of the basics. I'll do that occasionally. You'll see Appy show up and we'll kind of talk about what we just talked about. First, identity resolution is kind of what Data Cloud uses to create a unified view of an individual or an account. And then that process is going to create two things. It's going to create a unified profile and a unified link. That's all you need to know right now. I'll get into those in more detail later. Next, the process of identity resolution is broken down into two different stages. The matching process, which groups together profiles, and then the reconciliation process, which summarizes attributes about that unified profile. Lastly, we can group our matching criteria into groupings called rules. If all the criteria are met within a rule, then a match is made. The more criteria that we add to a rule, the more difficult it gets for a profile to match. All right. So we've covered how match rules get organized, but let's just dig into some more specific examples about the different types of criteria that you can use before getting the big picture on how match rules all come together. Sometimes we'll be able to make matches with a high degree of precision. And in those cases, we might want to use exact matches on different types of attributes. We can make exact matches on things like phone numbers, email addresses, names, mailing addresses, device identifiers. There's a special class of identifier out there called party identification. I'll call that out in a little bit more detail later. One other thing to keep in mind here is just because these methods require exact matches on attributes doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to have the same amount of precision and confidence when we're grouping individuals together. individuals, two people out there might share the same phone number, like my mom and dad do in their home. My mom and dad actually have the same email address, and they have the same mailing address. They're not the same person, they're different, So we can't use all of those PII sometimes to be able to identify the same person. We might need to use a concert of some of those things. Phone numbers are also kind of reassigned after somebody gives them up, All exact matching means in this context is that it's looking for an exact match in terms of the text that it's matching on. That's it. From there, go run down, one row down, we'll start looking at normalized. This allows us to kind of fix certain formatting problems with the way that data is input. If you struggle with data standardization, this can be a great way to kind of allow for more flexibility in your match rules. This isn't supported in every single field, but some basic identifiers out there, like phones, email addresses, and mailing addresses. Then there's that last type of matching that we support that's based on a probabilistic match or a fuzzy match. This is currently only supported on a first name. Eventually, I'd like to kind of see that being supported for things like email addresses, but right now it's just first name. When you set up fuzzy matching, eventually things like you'll also start to get to be able to configure the degree of precision for those things with fuzzy matching that you can match on. And I'll talk that through again too. So in terms of that precision, here's a quick cheat sheet for you. I'm not sure, I don't think we test on this in terms of consultant, but you want to be the best consultant in the world. And that's what this is going to take, understanding this precision. So generally, the lower precision you have in fuzzy matching, the lower that statistical similarity is going to be between two different names. And it's kind of based on loose similarities. So low precision, that allows for names to be downright spelled wrong sometimes, Maybe we've got Lisa and Lisa, Liza, Lisa, Lisa. They could be the same person. It's unusual to see someone spelling their name both ways, unless someone else might be inputting that information for them. So low precision, it's going to be pretty generous in terms of matching. Medium precision, that gets us a little bit less variation, but it does still add some flexibility for things like initials, some uncommon nicknames like Pepe for Jose, and so on. Then when you've got high precision, this is where you start to have much less variation in names, really kind of only allowing for things like, hyphenation or known nicknames for me, my name's Matthew, but my nickname is Matt. Not much more than that. Like I said, you probably aren't going to be tested on this, but it's good to know. So here's a quick visual example of how normalization works for some of the other things. Let's start with emails. It kind of helps strip out some of the additional characters that might be appearing in an email, and it also ignores capitalization. One of the things that it doesn't account for, as far as I'm aware, is periods and pluses in email addresses, like the thing that Google allow you to add. You can add periods to kind of punctuate an email address for Gmail. You can also add pluses to kind of create filters for emails. I know I used a lot of that during my Marketing Cloud days. And expect to have Data Cloud look at addresses in somewhat of a similar way as Marketing Cloud. If you want to strip those out, or if you want to format those, you can certainly do that. But before you do that, just remember, this is information that a customer has shared with you. They likely had a reason to share it that way, or at least we can assume that they did. And if you reformat that information to just look at it in a uniform way, that might not be the most trusted way to handle their data. Because what happens if they decide to add a spam filter to their email address and you strip that out? That's going to erode their trust. That's probably what would happen. So I would say tread cautiously there, before formatting customer supplied data on your own, and especially tread cautiously when doing that in Data Cloud. And there's some bigger considerations here as to where standardization of data fits in, and where that intersects with Data Cloud. So this is a good time as any to kind of remind you that transformation and formatting of data, adding formula fields for data, you should not use that as a replacement for standardization. If you want to standardize your data, That's great. Just don't try to do that in Data Cloud. It's a system of reference. It's not a system of record for some of those fields. Most of your data in Data Cloud is not going to be a system of record. It's just simply referring to the data that lives in other systems. And when you fix that by formatting it in Data Cloud, you're not actually fixing anything. You better fix it in the source. All right, moving on. Same sorts of things will happen when you normalize mailing addresses. What's going to happen with addresses is that Data Cloud's going to kind of run the address through a machine learning algorithm, and it's going to parse, and it's going to normalize that address. So if you take a minute and look through all the different permutations that you see here on the slide, and some of the countries and the addresses that are listed there, hopefully it'll give you some relief. You won't have to standardize every single part of your data in order to make simple matches. Normalized addresses are a beautiful thing, and I hope you love them as much as I do. There's one other type of matching that I've kind of saved for last, and that's my favorite. It's party matching. Party matching is a very special set, or party identification, I should say. It's a very special set of matching because it's not really trying to match based on basic individual attributes like your name and your address. It's using real identifiers. These could be owned by your systems, in case of like federated identification, like a golden record, or Okta ID, ERP ID. These could be system identifiers like your contact ID. These could be other external identifiers, like imagine a driver's license number or government ID or social security number. All of those identifiers are welcome here. This is the most precise type of matching that Data Cloud offers, but even a matching method like this can yield improper matches if you implement it incorrectly, or if they're misunderstood. So let's start with the basic components of party identification. This process starts in the harmonization phase, where you start mapping key identifiers from your specific DLOs to the party identification DMO. At a minimum, you're going to need an identification name, number, party, and a party identification ID. Let's kind of go from the bottom up. Let's talk about the party identification ID. We're going top down. My bad. The last three, I'll go bottom up, and then I'll start at the top. So, party identification ID. This is basically a primary key. Vlad has gone into great detail in the past workshop talking about best practices here in terms of setting a good primary key. So I'm not going to repeat his wisdom. Just go back and watch that session. You'll get a really good lesson on the subject of how to pick a good primary key for a record. The party field, that's essentially your foreign key. And that's going to point back to your individual or your account. Make sure that this is a match with the individual or the account ID. You should be fine there. The next three are a combination of identifiers, and they go from broad to specific. And this is the one that I like to talk about from the bottom up. So let me start with the identification number. This is something that is this is your actual identifier, your actual ID number. This could be that government ID, that customer ID, contact ID. This is the actual text value of it. This is where that gets used and mapped. Now, a lot of systems might use the same types of identifiers, especially, imagine systems with serialized identifiers. Marketing Cloud uses serialized identifiers for their subscriber ID. So unless your identifier is truly universally unique, it might not be enough on its own. That ID might not be enough on its own to match with another profile reliably. We want you to try to create two more groupings above it, this is where the identification name and the type come together. The identification name, that's kind of how you describe that identifier. I live in Minnesota, so that might be my Minnesota license plate number. I'm being specific here because it's possible that different states might reuse those identifiers. And so especially for something like a license plate, my license plate might be unique to Minnesota, but it may not be unique across the United States or across the world. So we might need a different classification on top of that. So we're saying it's a Minnesota license plate number. Finally, you've got a party identification type. That kind of allows you to give it that name a bit of a superset, kind of such as a license plate, maybe, or a social identifier if you're doing social handles. All right. So I'd mentioned kind of the source of each of these fields somewhat generally in the last slide. And this slide is just a bit more specific in terms of where that data starts to originate from. So like how you're classifying it and where you're mapping it in terms of your harmonization process. So in terms of things like your ID, party ID, you might need to create some formula fields for certain things. You might need to create a formula field for your identification name. That might not be coming from a source system, and your type. And that's somewhat expected. But your identification number, your party, your primary key, those could all be coming from your source system. But you might want to do a little bit of formula work on that ID before you map it. To make sure that it's unique, I should say. When you're adding your match rule in the interface, it might sound silly, but all you need to add here for party identification is just that name and the type. It doesn't need a match pattern or anything like that. You put in the name, the type, and anyone that matches on that party ID will be matched. And here's just another quick example of what you might see as kind of some example values from some of these required fields, where you'd use them, how they're defined. This is a great slide to screenshot for study purposes. So while you're doing that and you're getting your screenshotties out, I'll do one quick call out while you're digesting and screenshotting. And I want to talk a little bit about party identification, especially between Marketing Cloud and CRM. These are in cases where you might have your subscriber key as your contact or your lead ID. This is pretty common, in that scenario. What are you going to use as party identification? It sounds weird, might be a weird scenario, since Marketing Cloud subscriber key can literally be anything. It could be an email address, it could be a customer number, random GUID. It's very flexible. In cases you've got your connected org and your subscriber key is your contact or your lead ID, and you want to use party identification as a way to match people, let's do a quick survey to see if you can spot any potential issues there. All right. Here's the question. I'll start with a bit of a summary here. Let's see here. So the question that I have is more along, what's going to happen here? Let's say I've got two data sources that I've brought together. I've brought together consuming my CRM data, consuming my Marketing Cloud data, and I've created party identification. And this is what I've got for my party identification for two different records. Tell me, are these going to match? Or are these not going to match? So what's your answer? Are they going to match or not a match? I'm getting some yeses, I'm getting some nos. This is good. Seeing some yeses. Sonam says no. It's a mix. It's about 50-50. I'm excited. Okay, give it a few more seconds. Okay. All right. So they don't match. They don't match. For those of you who got it right, about half of you, I expect to see those passing exam results next week. You get a gold star. I'm very proud of you. For those of you who didn't get it right, here's why they don't match. This is why we do this. Remember before I said you need a match on the name, the type, and the number? Marketing Cloud called its identifier a subscriber key. And CRM called its identifier a contact ID. And they're both right? That's what they are. But unfortunately, that also means that without a matching party identification name, even though they have the same matching number, they've got the results will never get compared against each other. They also need their party identification names to match. So it kind of begs the question, doesn't it? What do I set up as a party identification name when I'm ingesting and mapping data from Marketing Cloud? Do I call it CRM contact ID? If it's coming from Marketing Cloud, yeah, you might need to, if that's truly what it is and should be. Think about multi-org scenarios here. Marketing Cloud can set up subscriber keys across many, many CRM orgs. And you'll want to come up with a naming convention that allow your subscribers to kind of match within CRM contacts in more than one CRM system in Data Cloud. There you go. That's advanced level stuff. And hopefully that's enough information to keep some of you from kind of finding yourself in a bit of a pickle in the future. All right. Let's recap a few things that we've kind of covered in terms of matching criteria. People often confuse rules and criteria, but they are separate. Criteria, those are used to kind of match identities based on attributes like a first name, last name, date of birth, contact points like email, and other identifiers like contact or government IDs. Match rules, those can be used to kind of, they can be normalized, to kind of allow for greater flexibility and variations of the data's formatting. This kind of allows us it helps out a lot, I should say, when you're trying to ingest data, so you don't have to worry about standardizing everything before running matching rules. Fuzzy matching, that allows us for a little bit more probabilistic matching of first names and nothing else right now. Generally, the fuzzier that you get, the less likely it's going to be that the two people are the same. So this is something you might want to test when you're implementing it. And then lastly, party identification. That's a very precise way to kind of match identifiers across systems. But you've got to carefully configure it in terms of for it to work correctly. Keep special consideration in mind when it comes to Marketing Cloud and CRM, and I'll absolutely hand out gold stars for that. All right. I think we've exhausted the subject of matching criteria pretty well at this point. So let's go back. Let's talk a little bit about how these different sets of matching criteria work together. Remember, I can group many different criteria into a single rule. The more criteria I add to that rule, the harder it becomes to kind of make a match. So if I want to create very strict criteria, I might have something naturally very restrictive like party identification, or I might have a lot of different criteria to kind of make it more difficult to make a match. But we need more flexible rules here. Remember Katrine? She's got data everywhere. And she's got lots of little puzzle pieces. So we need a strategy that allows us to kind of make matches in lots of different ways. So we'll build a rule set then that's based off of multiple rules. Each rule can have its own set of criteria. And all it takes is for one of those matching rules to be satisfied with two or more profiles for them to be matched. Remember, rules use or conditions, which means that if a profile matches on one of the more of the included rules, they are matched in the unified profile. It's always this way. Criteria are kind of grouped with exclusive and operators, and rules are grouped with inclusive operators, ORs. So that grouping of rules is called a rule set again. Think of a rule set as a container for your identity resolution match logic. Okay, question time again. What happens if I were to add more rules to my rule set? Does it increase, possibly, or decrease the potential match rate? I'm seeing a decrease. I'm seeing some increases. Pluses, I think that's an increase. Decrease, increase, decrease. Oh, now the decreases are coming. There's an answer. All right. Let's jump to the answer. It is increase. It is increase. Theoretically, and this is theoretically, the answer is that it would increase because every time I add another rule to the rule set, I'm adding another chance for a match to be made. And so I increase the opportunity. All right, let's recap. Let's bring Appy back, which means there's a few things we want to recap. Let's talk about criteria. That's our smallest tool that we can use to compare attributes between profiles. They're what we look at to make matches on. If we satisfy all of their criteria within a single matching rule, we create a match. So therefore, when we add more criteria to a rule, we reduce the likelihood that our profiles are going to match because we raise the requirements for every profile getting compared. We can get around this by creating multiple different ways of matching profiles using different rules. Rules are groupings of different criteria, allowing us to match on different identifiers or attributes across platforms. When we add more rules, it increases the likelihood of making a match with profiles. A grouping of match rules, I should say, is called a rule set. And the product of running identity resolutions matching rules is what? It's a unified profile. All right. So what is a unified profile? We've talked about the needs for understanding kind of our customer data across sources and where identity resolution helps us. We haven't really talked much conceptually about what gets produced in identity resolution. That's those two records I had mentioned them before, our unified profile and our unified link. A unified profile, and this could be unified individuals, could be accounts, is the basis behind a system of reference. It's one of the few unique records that gets generated by Data Cloud. Think of it like a key ring. A key ring is that thing that links different keys together. You've probably all had one of these at one point or another in your life. I've got one. It's my unified access to the things I want to keep secure and are personal to me, like my house, my car, my office, and so on. The purpose of the key ring, its value, is in how it links together all those things in a way that's personal to me. I wouldn't have my neighbor's car key on my key ring. So much like a key ring, a unified profile kind of acts as a personal way of maintaining linkages to all the other connected profiles for an individual, like their marketing cloud data, commerce data, CRM data, and also has some information that gets reconciled from all of them to help describe what this new entity is. And that's what the process of reconciliation produces. A little bit more on that in a bit. Identity resolution also creates something called a unified link. The unified link, that's its own thing. It's its own entity. It serves basically as a junction record between the unified profile and the account or the individual that it's linked to. Every unified profile has one link for each individual or account that it's connected to. And it's totally possible for there to be a unified profile of one. Excuse me. Still got a bit of a cold. When identity resolution, can't match a profile with any others, it's still going to create a profile and it's still going to create a unified profile, a unified link, but there's only going to be one profile associated with it. And that is totally fine as a party of one key on one key ring. Unified links are pretty important though, because their purpose is to kind of connect you with the rest of that unified profile and all the other profiles that it's linked to. You can access that link with your key from your source system. Let's say you've got a contact ID, and the link can then provide you with that unified individual that's associated with that profile. Does everybody get that? So let's talk this through. Let's say with this example, I'm in Salesforce Org 1, and I want to find any data that's been unified in Org 2 that's associated with my unified contact. So my process is I'll reach out to Data Cloud. I'll look for that unified link, that is associated with my contact, and that returns the unified individual that's associated with it. And then I look again at my list of links for any individuals that are associated with that unified individual, and I might find another link in there that's not related to Org 1's contact. Now we got one that's related to Org 2. Okay, great. From there, now I have my way into data that's related to Org 2. Okay. And now, because now I have its key, and I can access any information that I need from that source with that key. So when I'm looking at Data Cloud, from outside of Data Cloud, if I'm in another org, my link is my way to move around within that unified individual. All right, that's a big thing. I want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page here, that nothing's getting merged in this process. Nothing's getting destroyed in this process. This unified profile that's getting created, all it's doing is it's just linking profiles together. It's flexible and it can change. And that is a good thing. Let me give you an example. So let's walk through a basic, plausible scenario where we've kind of ingested two different systems into Data Cloud, and we've run identity resolution on both of these systems. Let's look at two records in this system. On the left, we got Astro, okay? And on the right, we've got R2. They both have the same email address. They both have the same phone number, the same last name, but their first names are different. Now, let's say our match rules are trying to unify individuals on a fuzzy first name, an exact last name, email address, or we're going to adding another rule here, a fuzzy first name here, an exact last name or an exact phone number, and for all of those. I've got these rules summarized over here. Now, because we've got fuzzy matching here, it's not going to find a statistically confident relationship between the first names R2 and Astro. These are going to be seen as separate profiles, and each one of those gets their own unified profile because they have to match on all three criteria. Even if they match on the last name and the email address and the phone. That's just kind of how we've set up these particular rules. In this particular scenario, this is fine. This is expected. But let's say something changes within our source data. Let's say that our friend R2, or we call him R2 anyway, keeps getting personalized emails sent to R2. And that kind of gets them frustrated enough where they kind of call their service provider and they say, hey, I'm not R2. My name's Astro. And so the service agent, they go into the console, change their source records, and now this record over here in this other org is now Astro. Then we ingest that data again into Data Cloud. We run identity resolution again, and now we have an entirely different outcome. The record that was once R2 now gets associated with that other original Astro record, and they're now seen as the same profile. Again, this is okay and expected. Now, a lot of you might be looking at this and kind of saying, big deal, that's supposed to happen. I get it. And that's awesome. The point is that not all sorts of unified data systems work exactly this way. Some of your typical MDM solutions that work on survivorship, some of them don't work this way. Data Cloud's model is a little bit more flexible than that. It kind of allows our underlying data to change and reflect what's true from that source system, and we want that. We don't want to let well-meaning but occasionally flawed matching rules overwrite data in all sorts of other systems, in scenarios where that might be a bad idea. What we want is information to make an informed decision, and that's exactly what we get with this unified profile. Now, you might want more flexibility than this. You might want to be able to kind of match in different ways with different use cases, and that's something, again, the Data Cloud allows for you to do. We do that by giving you more than one identity resolution rule set within the platform. So you can have multiple rule sets. Before I said a rule set is a combination of rules, and rules are made up of a combination of match criteria. So let's say you want to have more controlled and strict identity resolution rules for when you contact your customers. You can create an operational rule set to kind of reduce the likelihood of matching outlier profiles that really aren't meant to be matched. Maybe you'd have more criteria in your rules, or maybe you would have fewer rules that look at more trusted relationships, ones like party identification. Or maybe you want to have a rule set as a little bit more liberal in order to understand maybe larger trends and predict outcomes. And the risk is lower since we're really only internally analyzing this information. You can make another rule set with fewer criteria and more rules and more opportunities to match. Maybe you're just not sure what's going to happen. If you change your rules, you've already got a production rule set in place. Things are working mostly fine, but we want to know, what if we change this? What's going to happen to our consolidation rate? So you can build a test identity resolution rule set. Each one of those scenarios would produce a new rule set, and a new rule set produces a whole set of new unified profiles and unified links because our interpretation of how we've unified the data has changed. Multiply that with identity resolution for both accounts and profiles, and now we're looking at multiples of rule sets within a single instance. And that's not even the half of it. I'm assuming data spaces have been covered already, since this is a series that's covered ingestion. If you haven't learned about data spaces yet, don't worry. I'm just trying to illustrate that data spaces within Data Cloud, they get their own identity resolution rule sets. And it's safe to assume you probably won't see a lot of customer instances that are implementing this way. It's a bit more of an advanced topic, but consumption has a lot to do with it. And Data Cloud is a consumption-based model. Identity resolution is one of the most credit-intensive activities that can be performed in Data Cloud, and multiplying your rule sets is a sure way of running up your costs in terms of credits by multiples. So keep that in mind and make sure there's value that's kind of driving the need to build a new resolution rule set. It's not cheap. Okay, let's recap again with API. You know what that means. We'll talk about the unified profile again. Think of that as a key ring. That's a thing that's grouping all of your match records together. Your unified link, it's a junction record that allows you to access your key ring containing a unified profile from anywhere and find other profiles that are connected to it. This is great, which means that Data Cloud's unification process is not destructive. It doesn't pick the best record in any of these scenarios. It just maintains lineage to every single connected record. If the data behind them changes, it allows the identity resolution rules to be rerun, and then different results can be produced. When it comes to identity resolution rule sets, you can have more than one. This allows you to test different combinations of rules, find an ideal match rate, or handle some internal versus external customer-facing use cases. Last thing is on data spaces. If you have more than one data space, you want to unify profiles, you'll need to have an identity resolution rule set in every data space too. They can't share data spaces. And oh my gosh, I almost forgot to talk about consolidation rate. It's a key statistic. Consolidation rate is essentially the percentage of profiles that have been consolidated within your organization. So this is another one that's going to come up on the exam, which is I'm talking about it now. If I had no matches within my system, my consolidation rate would be roughly 0. It would mean that there was no consolidation between any profile within my organization. Whereas if every single profile were to be consolidated and matched with another, that would be closer to 100. That's not the goal, by the way. The goal is not to get to 100%. It's not like a perfect score. Consolidation is simply just showing you all of the different places within your organization that your profiles overlap. You're going to have unique records that are coming from different systems. And that's a given. So your consolidation rate is not meant to be a specific number. It's really just meant to be a data point. And you can use that consolidation rate to kind of figure out, I'm going to be validating my data. I want to be able to inspect my data and understand where my profiles are getting unified. If I make a change to it, does that increase my consolidation rate? Do I have more liberal match rules now? Or do I make another change and bring it down? So you kind of, it's that score that kind of gives you a sense of how much consolidation you're having within your work. All right. Boy, I think we've talked matching to death. It's time to talk about reconciliation rules, and we are almost at time to bring it home here. We're kind of in the home stretch. Big thing to remember, reconciliation is different from matching. Remember that identity resolution is a 2-part process. This is the other part. I'll be honest here. I'm not a huge fan of reconciliation for reasons that I will describe in a little bit, but It definitely has a use. I think there's just some considerations that need to be understood here to make sure that people are using those reconciled attributes correctly. Reconciliation is the process of determining what attributes best summarize a unified profile. It's a somewhat limited way of picking the best attributes between systems with rules that allow you to kind of pick which system gets to populate which field based off of criteria that you define. You could build a ton of reconciled attributes and contact points, but not much of it is available within Data Cloud, especially if you want to try to activate on some of that information. So I think we'll just focus for now on the process of kind of building reconciled attributes for your unified profile, and why you might want to use that. Let's talk through. Let's go connect with Katrine again. Let's talk through a scenario involving her. We remember Katrine, right? She's got lots of attributes that are coming from tons of different systems. So how do we know which ones are the best to kind of describe her unified profile? You know, that process isn't really defined. This is more of a consultative one. This is one that you're going to have to investigate internally to come up with the right answer here. Um, you know, you're going to have to figure out how are we going to look at all of our different sources and come up with priorities here? And how do we reconcile that if there are conflicts, right? You only get a few tools here in terms of reconciliation. You know, you can use last modified, and that's going to pick an attribute or a field for systems that have last modified their data. And that's prioritizing fresh data over old data. You know, I have new input. Someone filled out a form. That type of a scenario. You can use most frequently occurring. That's kind of prioritizing the values that seem to be most prevalent across systems. So hoping for strength in numbers here, or you can prefer fields that, you know, or attributes that are coming from some of your VIP systems, right? And who's got the VIP system in your organization? Is that CRM? Is it your ERP? I don't know. What's the better choice when looking at first name? The point is you get to kind of decide in those in terms of source priority. All right. So then you can apply that process. And Hari, I saw your question. We'll get to questions at the end. I'll kind of scroll up and we get to ask them again. I want to try to finish up on time here. You're going to kind of apply that process to kind of dictate, you know, which system gets priority for every field. So if, you know, and I mean every single field within a unified profile. So at a field level, you can dictate which system gets what. You know, by default, these attributes are all kind of grouped in sensible areas. So, and they all come with defaults for your various contact points, individual attributes, party identification, all that stuff you see there. And so when you dictate which system gets priority over what, you know, you'll go from this view of different individuals to one like this. Now, we have a unified individual. And instead of all those attributes that are kind of coming in from every single source that are kind of describing Katrine, we're getting a single attribute. That could be great, depending on your use case, but that might also not be great. So let's explore a little bit of that and kind of understand the reasons why. Let's start with the easy stuff. You know, if you're referencing this information internally and you want to surface Katrine's unified data within something like a Lightning Web Component, well, that's a very common thing. You might access the reconciled attributes from the unified profile in order to populate that, right? And that would be totally safe and fine to do. You can also do the same thing when kind of building dashboards or doing internal analyses. It's totally safe. You know, there's no risk in being able to share the wrong information internally. You know, here's where you need to use caution. You know, be very careful on what attributes you're going to choose to activate and expose directly back to the customer. Because there's a lot of things that can cause some surprises, maybe some chuckles, some hurt feelings, and maybe some huge mistakes that are kind of depending on your reconciliation rules and how your profiles are unified. Let me explain. Let me introduce you to a new person. We've got Katrina and Katrine Schmidt. Now, we all know Katrine. She's married to her husband, Josef Schmidt, and they've been living at the same address for the last 5 years. Katrina is Josef's sister. So Katrine's sister-in-law, and she's recently separated from her boyfriend, Carl. Boo, Carl. So Katrine and Katrina are both customers of yours. They share the same address, and their names are very similar. I use this as an example because this exact scenario has happened to me. My wife and my sister have the same first name, and she moved in with us for a period of time for this exact same reason. So now, why would that be a problem? Well, it depends on what's going on with identity resolution and how we're using those reconciled attributes. Let's imagine in this case, we're unifying on address, fuzzy first name, and exact last name. No issues there. So Katrine and Katrina, they're going to get unified into the same profile. That can cause all sorts of problems, but let's focus first on identity resolution. If all of a sudden, or I'm sorry, reconciliation. If all of a sudden Katrina's recent move to Katrine and Josef's house, so Katrine and Josef's house, if that move triggered an update to Katrina's profile data, and we honor the most recently updated data over others, well, now our unified profile is going to show Katrina's reconciled attributes instead of Katrine's. No problems yet. But let's say we want to use that contact information to kind of reach out to Katrine about maybe an important medical issue or a past due bill or some other type of important and very private thing. We could have a problem on our hands. So there's 2 lessons to be learned there. First is to make sure that when you're building identity resolution rules, you're using a lot of rigor around how those get defined. The default rules for Data Cloud's identity resolution rule sets, they're pretty simple. And this is fuzzy first name, last name, and email address. That's all it takes. Is that really enough? Sometimes not. The other lesson learned here is that although reconciled data is useful when looking internally at customers for things like dashboarding or embedding in a console, service console, sales console, it's not okay to share that information directly with customers because that may not be accurate. And it may not be the data that they've shared with you on that particular channel. And at the very least, that can cause a bit of a creepy feeling. And being creepy is never okay. So that's it in terms of identity resolution and reconciliation. Let's talk about some other things around this process that are important to understand. A little bit of time left. I want to make sure that there's time for questions. Let's talk a little bit about timings and scheduling. Basically, in terms of identity resolution, if you schedule it, it's going to run every 24 hours. And really, when I say 24 hours, it's not exactly 24 hours. It's 24 hours-ish. It's going to happen. It's going to basically enter a queue every 24 hours, and within that a very reasonable amount of time, it's going to run. More or less, expect it to run every 24 hours. If you want to run it differently or at a different cadence, you can run it on demand, and you can do that up to 4 times within every 24-hour period. So this kind of leads us to kind of think a little bit, well, why would I do that? And how should I use that best? And this kind of goes back to orchestration. There's definitely a process that you want to follow if you want to be able to make sure that your data is ingested, transformed, unified, insights gained before you kind of make use of it in other ways. And if I get the chance, I'll talk about in that Ask Me Anything with Arvind about that. For now, though, know that identity resolution is absolutely something that can be triggered via flow. So if you want to orchestrate that, it's kind of based on a certain schedule or a certain trigger within Data Cloud, like ingestion, or maybe a specific data source is being ingested or changed, you can definitely do that. I mean, I've actually seen instances where they've been able to create a button within CRM that launches a remote flow over to Data Cloud to launch identity resolution. So lots and lots of different creative ways to kind of manage identity resolution. Okay, some other things, and we've talked about some of these things already. This is kind of just my little reminder list. So I'm gonna go through here. We kind of talked about how it's not quite a golden record. Managing consents by contact point. That is more of an important thing that's going to come up during segmentation and activation, which I believe is going to be happening next week. And so, we don't have a thing called unified consent as of yet. We could talk a little bit about how we might try to do something like that and understand data across lots of different sources when we talk about insights next time. We don't have that right now. And I got to pull out my second to last bullet on there because we can absolutely unify on accounts. So strike that off the record. And let's see here. A couple of ones. We talked about being intentional with match rules. Let's see. There should be a business goal behind all those. This is more like consulting considerations. Let's see if there's anything in here. Yeah, I talked about there's no optimal consolidation rate. That's another big one. They are absolutely, products of how much data you've got spread across organizations and how you're choosing to identify folks. Okay, that's it. That's all for my scheduled content right now. I hope you learned something, and I can jump into questions now. So let's see.
Thanks, Matt. There's a lot to learn from this session, and
I'm going to go into
especially
Raja's question. So Raja asked, are party identification records identity resolution by default done using PI name, type, and ID? PI name, type, and ID. Party identification name, type, and ID. Let me think. Identification number, identification name, and identification type. Yes, those are the three. There's some other ones that we talked about in terms of harmonization, and that would be your primary key. So every record's going to need a key. So you need to have a primary key, and then the other thing is you're going to also need a party, and that is going to be your foreign key to your individual. So essentially 5 fields you're going to need at a minimum for party identification. All right, let's see. George has a question here. Can we choose what email address or name or whatever field is chosen for a specific channel? For example, use email 1 if sending a promo, use email 2 for service updates. No, the answer is no. But the answer will soon be yes. What is happening, and this is why I put up a forward-looking statement, is that you will have the ability to do some amount of orchestration in terms of contact points for specific activations. And so while you can't do that today, and this is absolutely got to come up during segmentation activation, in terms of what gets activated when you activate to a platform like Marketing Cloud, because what you actually activate, it's going to be a mix of stuff. You'll get a mixed bag of some, unified profile attributes, which may or may not be really great. And then you'll also get the individual, their contact point. So you actually get an individual's contact point activating out. So that's its own other consideration. We'll have to absolutely get into that when we talk about segmentation activation. All right. Let's see. Is there choice between using matching rules versus reconciliation? I mean, they're configurable. We certainly can configure all of those. It's not like we get a choice to say, do I want to run matching rules now or reconciliation? They're run at the same time. So when I run identity resolution first, the next thing that happens after that is reconciliation. Raj is asking, will the identity resolution run every day when the source info changed? It should. So when source information is changing, here's the other thing to understand about identity resolution. This is more of an advanced topic, is coming around consumption and how are we trying to make sure that, pricing is fair and transparent. We're trying to make it fair right now. We're trying to make it and we're also working on trying to find ways to make it more transparent. Where this applies to identity resolution is you only get charged for rows processed in identity resolution. And so if a record and its underlying criteria have changed, well, that constitutes a change, and we will run identity resolution on any records that have changed. That's it. Anything that hasn't moved, any data where its underlying, stuff hasn't changed, we're not going to touch it. It's not going to run an identity resolution, and you're not going to pay for it in terms of credit consumption. That's going to make that process faster, and it's going to make it, easier. All right. Let's see. Can we add an and condition? We can't add and conditions in a rule set. So now a rule set, that's your superset. That is a grouping of rules. And you cannot add an and condition in a rule set. As far as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe you can. I think once you've made a match within a rule, that's your chance to make a match. And then every rule that I add to my rule set gives me more and more chances to make a match. All right. I think that's most of the questions. If there is a question that didn't get answered, type it in or go off mute or whatever you want to do. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions for a little bit longer.
Yeah, we do have a few more minutes. We can make use of that. So I'm going to set the permission for you all to unmute.
Otherwise, thank you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for coming out. Going a little bit extra long with me today. I don't know if every session has been this long, but there's a lot of stuff to understand in terms of identity resolution. George is asking, do you mind explaining why party identification is needed? Not sure how it differs from identity resolution. Okay. So think of it this way. Think of identity resolution as the recipe and party identification as an ingredient. Okay. So party identification is just one of those different types of things that I might use to create a match between profiles. So if I want to be able to match on like my subscriber key from Marketing Cloud and my CRM ID from Sales Cloud, I could use party identification as a way to match. It's just using identifiers that I have in different systems to kind of make my matches instead of having to rely on something like PII. He's asking, do I mean that fields are different? Yeah, not relying on PII. That's the key. And I would say that party identification is definitely the better system to use when you're trying to match on identifiers like that. I think there's probably cases where people have tried to put attributes on an individual and tried to kind of match based off of those attributes. And I think you could do that, but I don't think it's really meant to work that way. I do think that party identification is the better of the two systems. All right. Well, great. Tell you what, if you have any other questions, drop them in. I mean, JB, you're going to be posting this on YouTube. Drop a question there. I'll check back in a little while and kind of answer questions there. If you have any other further questions, hit me up on LinkedIn. My name's Matthew Wash. You can search for me. I'll be happy to connect with you. And I'll be back for one more session on Thursday. I'll talk about insights. And then we've got an AMA panel as well. As she was saying, I'll be there as well. Thanks again for coming. Really appreciate all of you. Thanks for staying up late if you're in the States. Thanks for getting up early if you're over in APAC. And thanks again. I'll catch you guys again real soon.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. This has been so helpful. Wonderful. Thanks for your time and being flexible and sharing all the insights. Once again, we thank everyone for joining. So let's catch up again in the next session. It's going to be on insights. Matt is going to lead the session. Thank you.